Maryland Governor Larry Hogan has led his state's response to the coronavirus.
He also has a new book out later this month. It's called Still Standing: Surviving Cancer, Riots, a Global Pandemic, and the Toxic Politics That Divide America. Governor, good morning. Thanks for being with us, and I'm impressed you have time to write about so much in this book.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
It's nice to have you here. So let's start talking about the pandemic. On Tuesday, Maryland Health Department reported that there are more than 70,000 coronavirus cases in the state, but the number of hospitalizations is staying flat at around 400. Now, you've said you're on the positive track. So what are your biggest concerns right now in terms of what you're seeing? Would you ever consider rolling back your state's reopening like some other states have had to do?
Well, look, we're being very cautious, and we're paying a lot of attention to the numbers every single day. Luckily, so far, we've been trending in a really good direction. Our numbers are about 86% down from our peak, and we continue to drop. We're one of only 15 states in the country that is at staying steady or going in the downward direction. And we're concerned about what we're seeing in other states. But we took early and aggressive action to try to flatten the curve, and those steps seem to be working in our state. But we're by no means out of the woods on this, and we're really concerned about what we're seeing in other states.
Governor, speaking of that, I mean, New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy just a few moments ago announced he's going to sign this executive order requiring folks to wear face masks. Governor Cuomo has instituted a quarantine. Folks that travel to other states, they're supposed to quarantine when they come back to New York. Have you thought about enacting some of those measures to try and keep your numbers down in Maryland?
So again, our numbers are really down, better than almost anybody in the country, and we have enacted many of those things already. We don't have a mandatory mask everywhere, but when you're inside of retail stores, you do have to wear a mask, and most people, just with the advice and guidance that we've been giving them over and over again since March, following CDC guidelines and the advice of our epidemiologists and our public health doctors, most Marylanders are, following the rules, and I think it's one of the reasons why we've been so far so good.
Speaking of the pandemic, it's been reported that a real estate company that you started got one of these loans from the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, loan somewhere between $150,000, $350,000. I know that you're not actively running that company now. Other governors' businesses have also gotten money as well. But what do you say to those who might question whether your business had any sort of advantage when it applied for that loan?
Well, I think there were 8 million of these loans in the across the country, and the whole idea was to keep people on the payroll. So this is about protecting people's paychecks. It's not really about handouts to businesses and special favors. But I have no involvement whatsoever in the company. I'm not allowed to be involved, and had no idea that there was that they even applied.
Governor, over the weekend, protesters, they vandalized a statue of Christopher Columbus. They threw it into the harbor. You called that, quote, the antithesis of democracy. You called on officials to regain control of their streets. So what happens to the statue now, and what's been the feedback from the people in your state who wanted it removed?
Well, I'm not sure it was the people in our state who wanted it removed, but look, my concern over this issue was not debating the merits of Christopher Columbus, but just having, mob rule, where we just have people decide which statues, what public property they want to deface and tear down. So there's a way to go about this process. I understand some of the concerns and issues, and we have a process where you can go and try to get some of these statues removed. I think it's good to have those discussions, but just to have people violating the law and tearing down whatever piece of art or whatever statue or piece of history, whatever public property they want to destroy, is not the way to go about it. So we've got to stop and figure out how we can have a rule of law in our cities.
I mean, that we are, Governor, as you know, in the middle of this reckoning in our country, where lots of statues and memorials and symbols, they are being reconsidered. Last week, we reported that the football team in the D.C. area, whose stadium, of course, is in Maryland, they're undergoing a thorough review of their name after pressure from activists and corporations who think that the name is racist. You write about being a fan and attending games in your book. Should that team change its name?
I think the time is probably right. I'm glad that they're having that discussion. I believe the name will be changed. And I think, look, I grew up in the Washington area as a Redskin fan. It's got a lot of history associated with the name, but I understand it's a hurtful name, and in today's context, it probably should be changed.
You acknowledge that it's a slur?
Absolutely.
It was reported in the New York Times on Tuesday that you are considering a run for president in 2024, which might explain the book right now to a certain extent. When do you expect to make a final decision, Governor Hogan, and how are you going to make that decision?
Well, look, I saw some speculation in the New York Times about it, but it's not something that I have actually talked about at all. I put out a book. I'm putting out a book at the end of this month based on my life story, which I think we've got a lot of interesting things to talk about, and I've got some concerns about my party and the direction of the country, which I share in the book. But right now, we've got another election coming up in 100 and some days to worry about. It's 4 years after that. I've still got a day job that I'm focused on until January of 2023. So I'm not making any moves towards 2024. A lot of people have talked about that speculation, and I didn't rule it out. But it's a long way off and far too early to talk about it.
You did just say, though, that you've never talked about it. Is that true? You've never talked about it?
No, I said I didn't talk about that with the report in New York Times.
Okay.
I mean, I've talked about it. People were encouraging me to run in 2020, and we decided not to. But there's no right now. We need to stay focused on this pandemic and the crisis. I had this book ready to come out actually before the crisis, and we put it on hold. And then the publishers asked us to add a few chapters in about the current crisis, which we did, and I think people will find it interesting.
Okay. Governor Larry Hogan, always a good guest. Thank you, Governor. Appreciate your time. Again, that book that he just referenced that we were talking about, it's called Still Standing, out at the end of the month.